Welcome to the debate. Imagine betting your country's entire agricultural and transportation future on a single piece of forged steel arriving on a Mediterranean beach.
I mean, it sounds like an unprecedented gamble.
It really does. But, that is exactly the reality unfolding right now. We are sitting here in May 2026, and just days ago, on May 21st, the reactor pressure vessel for Unit 2 actually arrived at the Dabaa Nuclear Power Plant site in Egypt.
Yeah, which is just huge. We're watching this staggering project rapidly transition out of the realm of pouring concrete and baseline civil engineering straight into the highly sensitive, microscopic precision of nuclear installation.
Right, and the clock is ticking loudly here. Egypt's government is aiming to bring 4 distinct third-generation advanced reactors online by 2030.
Right. And when those 4 are finished, this single facility is slated to supply roughly 35 billion kilowatt-hours annually.
Yeah, which covers, 12% of Egypt's projected electricity needs for the rest of the decade.
Exactly. Which brings us to the core tension we're exploring today. Does the Dabaa project represent an unassailable economic triumph that, definitively secures Egypt's clean energy transition and modern infrastructure growth?
Or does pinning the entirety of the nation's modern development on the compressed, basically zero margin for error timeline of a single nuclear megaproject create a deeply concerning systemic vulnerability? I'll be taking the side that Dabaa is a robust, transformative cornerstone for Egypt's economic independence.
And I'll be arguing that the cascading dependencies on this localized project introduce immense fragility into the national system.
So from my perspective, by completely replacing the need for 30 billion cubic meters of natural gas, this plant acts as a massive economic engine. The sheer scale of its clean power is, exactly what is required to reliably fuel the nation's sprawling new megaprojects.
See, I come at it from a different way. While I fully acknowledge the immense technical achievement of these third-generation reactors, tying the success of the new Delta's irrigation, the national rail transit, and billions in projected gas exports to a rigid 2027 to 2030 launch schedule, it creates a precarious national bottleneck.
I see why you think that, but let's drill into that economic engine concept first. I think we need to look at how the transition from fossil fuels actually works here.
Please do, because the math is where I think this gets complicated.
Well, if you're wondering how a single power plant literally changes a nation's balance of trade, it really comes down to displacement. Right now, to generate this equivalent amount of electricity, Egypt relies heavily on domestic fossil fuels.
Right, mostly natural gas.
Exactly. And Dabaa will completely eliminate reliance on natural gas and oil for this specific colossal segment of the power grid. That simple substitution saves roughly $3 billion annually in fuel costs right off the bat.
Which is, a significant saving on paper.
Oh, it goes far beyond just paper savings, because by freeing up that 30 billion cubic meters of domestic natural gas that would otherwise have been literally burned up in local power plants, Egypt can redirect that exact same fuel to the global market.
To export it?
Yes. They pipe it to their coastal LNG terminals, liquefy it, and export it. The projections show this generating at least $7 billion annually in foreign exchange revenue. I kind of look at Dabaa like an economic dam.
An economic dam?
Yeah. Historically, the high dam at Aswan captured the physical flow of the Nile to guarantee agricultural survival. Dabaa basically captures billions in foreign exchange that would otherwise just, evaporate into atmospheric emissions.
Okay, an economic dam. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy the absolute certainty of those financial projections.
Why not? The gas is there.
Because you're assuming a perfectly frictionless transition from a decentralized fossil fuel-driven energy grid to a highly centralized single-point nuclear facility, shifting from dozens of scattered gas power plants to a single 4,800 megawatt nuclear facility on the coast doesn't eliminate reliance. It merely concentrates it.
But concentration in this context means efficiency. We're talking about baseload power.
Sure.
A third-generation nuclear plant operates at a capacity factor, meaning, the percentage of time it's actually producing maximum power that gas plants can only dream of. It runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
True when it's fully operational. But that $7 billion in export revenue you just mentioned? That is entirely theoretical until all 4 units are humming perfectly in 2030. The Egyptian economy is essentially holding its breath for an incredibly ambitious deadline.
The budget reflects the construction schedule, which is entirely normal for national infrastructure.
Normal maybe, but risky. We know the history of global nuclear construction. Delays of 2, 3, or even 5 years are incredibly common. If Unit 3 or Unit 4 is delayed by 2 years, that $7 billion annual windfall just doesn't materialize on schedule.
Well,
You've built an entire economic policy around a best-case scenario timeline.
that implies the timeline is just a mere aspiration, though. But look at the tangible progress we're seeing right now in the first half of 2026. The technical execution here is moving with extraordinary precision.
Okay, let's talk about the technical side then.
Let's do that. Because if you look at the actual components and what it takes to assemble them, it's remarkable. You have the reactor pressure vessel, the RPV.
The massive steel shell.
Right. It isn't just a container. It's a colossal forged steel outer shell designed to contain the extreme pressures and temperatures of the primary coolant loop. Then, separate from that, you have the reactor core, the actual inner heart where the nuclear fuel is housed and where the fission reactions take place.
Right.
And for Unit 1, both the RPV and the core are already fully installed.
Yeah, and as we established in the intro, Unit 2 just received its RPV a few days ago.
Exactly. Unit 1 is practically ready to receive its nuclear fuel a year from now. It is pacing perfectly for its 2027 pilot operation and then its 1,200 megawatt commercial launch in 2028.
And Unit 3?
Meanwhile, Rosatom is already actively manufacturing the steam generators for Unit 3. They are moving through the assembly stages methodically.
Methodically, yes, but you used a phrase a moment ago that perfectly illustrates my concern. You said extraordinary precision. Let's look at how that precision is actually achieved on the site.
Okay.
We are talking about a highly sensitive environment where there is, as the project leaders themselves admit, basically zero room for error.
Well, sure. Because of the strict international safety standards governing nuclear engineering.
Precisely. And how is that engineering executed? We're seeing the unprecedented use of giant, specialized heavy lift cranes to lower these massive components. You're swinging a forged steel cylinder weighing hundreds of tons in the coastal winds off the Mediterranean.
It's quite a sight.
It is! And you have to align it perfectly, so the primary cooling pipes mate precisely without stressing the structural joints. It is literally threading a microscopic needle with a skyscraper.
Doing that once is an engineering marvel.
Exactly, but they aren't just doing it once. They are performing this hyper-precise installation across 4 different units in a sequenced, overlapping timeline at what is being called record speed to meet this 2027 to 2030 window.
Right.
That inherently introduces immense risk. In a zero margin for error environment, speed is the enemy of predictability.
I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning because it ignores who is actually doing the work and the specific technology they're installing. Let's talk about those third-generation reactors.
Go ahead.
What makes them different from older plants? It's the incorporation of passive safety systems. They have these gravity-driven cooling systems that don't even rely on external electricity if something goes wrong, and advanced core catchers designed to safely contain nuclear material in the absolute worst-case scenarios.
I don't dispute the longevity or the safety mechanisms of the third-generation tech. I mean, they are incredibly sophisticated machines. My critique is not of the physics. My critique is of the project management philosophy at a national scale.
But the project management is precisely why this is sustainable. What's truly remarkable, and what I think fundamentally mitigates the risk you're talking about, is the deep integration of local industry.
You mean the workforce?
Yes. The civil construction has been fully taken over by Egyptian companies. The workforce on site is currently 80% Egyptian. We're looking at a project that is not only hitting its marks to make Egypt the 4th largest builder of nuclear capacity globally right now, but it's doing so by deeply upskilling the local workforce.
It's an impressive localized effort, I'll admit that.
Right. By having local companies fully master the construction phase, the state is domesticating the expertise. They aren't just importing a black box from Rosatom. They are learning how to build and maintain the box themselves.
It's a compelling argument regarding the long-term human capital benefit. I do think the knowledge transfer happening at Dabaa right now is historically significant for the region. But the knowledge transfer itself takes time.
Well,
Relying heavily on a newly upskilled workforce, even with intensive Rosatom training and oversight, to execute a heavily compressed, fast-track nuclear build is just a high-wire act. If one of those giant crane operations detects a millimeter of variance, the whole timeline stops to recalculate.
as it should.
Because it has to. Because there is no room for error. And when that timeline stops, what happens to the 2030 finish line?
The finish line isn't an arbitrary political goal, though. It is an existential infrastructural necessity. The reason this 4,800 megawatt rollout is moving at this pace is because modern Egypt fundamentally cannot function without it. We have to look at the cascading dependencies not as a weakness, but as the underlying logic of the project.
The dependencies are exactly what I'm worried about, though.
If you look at the scale of what is being built outside of Dabaa, you start to see the actual physics problem the country is facing. Egypt is undergoing unprecedented urban and industrial growth. Take the agricultural megaprojects, the new Delta and Toshka.
Right.
We are not just talking about laying down seeds in a valley. We are talking about radically altering the geography of food production out in the desert.
Which requires staggering amounts of water.
Does not flow there naturally. These projects require lifting millions of cubic meters of water against gravity, pumping it across vast distances from treatment plants, and running colossal pivot irrigation systems.
And proponents of renewables will say you can just use solar and wind for that.
But mathematically, you can't. Not at this scale. Solar and wind drop off when the sun sets or the wind dies down. You cannot intermittently lift millions of tons of water. If the power drops, the water physically falls back down the elevation gradients.
Fair point.
You need steady, unshakable baseload power. Furthermore, look at the national transport grid being constructed right now. The high-speed electric trains connecting the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, the new metro lines, the monorail.
All running on electricity.
Yes. A modern transport grid of that magnitude requires immense, constant kinetic thrust. Dabaa will produce more than double the electrical output of the high dam. It is literally the only clean power source mathematically capable of lifting the water into the desert and running the trains simultaneously.
And there it is, the house of cards.
How is that a house of cards?
You've just articulated perfectly why the structural design is so dangerous. By intertwining the fate of the high-speed electric train network and the vital agricultural expansion in the new Delta and Toshka, with Dabaa's exact completion dates, the state has created a systemic domino effect.
I call it systemic integration.
Integration implies modularity, though, like a web that can absorb shock. This is a bottleneck. Let's play out the scenario based on the very engineering constraints we just discussed. Say there's an issue with one of those giant cranes in late 2026.
Okay.
Or say the testing of the newly manufactured steam generators for Unit 3 takes, 6 months longer than anticipated to ensure the welds are perfect. What happens? In a normal decentralized grid, a delayed power plant just means keeping an older gas plant online a little longer. But here,
the stakes are undeniably higher.
higher? They are absolute. If the 2028 commercial launch of Unit 1, that crucial first 1,200 megawatts, slips to 2029 or 2030, it doesn't just delay a power plant. It potentially stalls the agricultural pivots in Toshka. It leaves the water sitting at the bottom of the elevation instead of watering the new delta crops. It grounds the national high-speed transit system because the baseload simply isn't there to support the trains. Betting the nation's food security and transit future on a zero-margin nuclear installation schedule leaves the nation terribly vulnerable.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. I understand the gravity of tying those systems together, but let's look at the alternative. If Egypt does not take this centralized, bold step, what is the fallback?
Keep using the current grid mix while building out incrementally.
Continuing to burn domestic natural gas to power the new Delta? That completely strips the country of the $7 billion in export revenue we discussed, leaving the state without the foreign exchange needed to finance the very infrastructure you're worried about stalling.
But at least the infrastructure wouldn't be held hostage to a single facility's construction schedule.
The risk of not building Dabaa on this timeline is a guaranteed economic stagnation.
Yes, all the chips are being pushed to the center of the table on this one facility, but these third-generation reactors are designed exactly for this kind of heavy lifting base load.
They are robust, yes.
They have operational lifetimes of 60 to 80 years. We are talking about a permanent solution to a chronic problem of energy scarcity and fossil fuel reliance.
It's basically the too-big-to-fail approach applied to energy infrastructure. We're asking one localized stretch of the Mediterranean coast to flawlessly execute a highly complex mechanical assembly to single-handedly rescue the national budget, water the desert, and power the trains. It demands a level of flawless execution across just too many variables.
It demands ambition, certainly. But it seems we are arriving at a point of convergence here regarding the sheer historic scale of what is being attempted.
Oh, absolutely. Whether one views it as a brilliant economic engine or a precarious bottleneck, there is no denying that Dabaa pushes Egypt into a completely different tier of global infrastructure capability. Ranking fourth globally in nuclear plants under construction is a monumental pivot point.
And producing double the output of the high dam is a generational shift for the grid. So, to summarize my position, Dabaa is far more than just an energy project. It is an indispensable catalyst for a modern Egypt.
Right.
By safely executing this construction with an 80% local workforce, the country is domesticating invaluable technical expertise. And more importantly, it's securing billions in gas exports, balancing its economy, and guaranteeing the immense, clean baseload power physically required to lift water into the new delta and power the transit of the future.
And to summarize my perspective, while the adoption of third-generation nuclear technology and the massive local workforce integration are remarkable achievements, the structural design of this national strategy is deeply flawed.
The bottleneck?
Yes, betting the country's agricultural survival, its transit functionality, and its economic budget on a fast-tracked, zero-margin-for-error nuclear installation schedule creates a highly precarious bottleneck that leaves the nation vulnerable to single points of failure.
We started our discussion today talking about the shape of infrastructure, a web versus an hourglass, a sprawling grid of redundancy versus a single colossal foundation holding up a skyscraper.
It's a massive shift.
It is. As Unit 1 at Dabaa approaches its critical 2027 pilot phase, and as those giant cranes swing the next forged steel components into place, threading that microscopic needle, the true test will unfold in real time. The listener will have to look at the horizon of 2030 and decide, are we watching this marvel of engineering become the steady, unshakable beating heart of the Egyptian economy? Or are we watching a desperately tense race against time where one slip stops everything? Thank you for joining us.